It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor, we bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalesuji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
Well, hello and happy Monday. I'm Ryan Kalesuji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. So great to see so many of you already tuning in, starting your week off with us. We're going to be heading over this morning to Honolulu Hale.
Yeah, let's get straight to it. We have Mayor Rick Blangiardi with us this morning. It's always great to hear from the mayor, and we always have so much to ask. Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning. Good to see both of you. I have to ask you, where do you find those pictures that you use of me? I tell you, it's scary. You know?
We will talk to the graphics department and up our game in that respect.
I swear, I think somebody over there has it out for me, but that's okay. I don't, it's all right.
All right. Well, let's get right to the news. And I want to talk to you about Skyline. You folks have had a very busy week, over a week now of the trains running. Your overall impressions of how it's all going and how you're feeling about the rail project at this moment.
Look, I feel very good about it because it was to have the privilege to be the mayor at the time when we began operations in and of itself was its own milestone for us, because coming into office, we knew how much the scenario, if you will, and all things involving rail were plaguing the community. I learned that through the campaign. I did so many Zoom calls, and it was on everybody's top of list of complaining, and just knowing what we inherited in the middle of a pandemic, getting the FTA back, getting it operational, making all of that happen almost right to the day, 2.5 years, to me was a really good achievement by our team. And I want to give Lori Kaikina a lot of credit as our, our head of that, but also Colleen Hanabusa, the board chair, all the people that played a role in getting our act together, if you will, but in the performance of it, and Hitachi and everybody else involved, so I feel really good about that. It was a big win for us. I'm not going to be coy about that.
Well, let's talk just a little bit about benchmarks for success and how you want to measure that. Of course, we saw the numbers just from that initial first week, and there were a lot of people who enjoyed that free weekend. Now that people are under the paid ridership and it's going more as routine, how are you going to measure the success in this first phase, and how do you really equate the level of success that it will have as we continue to look forward?
Well, obviously, we want to build on ridership, right? But, this is really kind of a startup, and it's going to require changes. We use the word often about it being transformative. And I think, our estimates are that we said publicly by the end of the first year, we're hoping that the current route of from East Kapolei to Aloha Stadium to Halava, we'll be averaging 8,000 to 10,000 riders a day. And I really do believe that that's attainable. We're asking people to change habits and so on. But I think when I look at it right now, my assessment is knowing how well it's been constructed, the quality of the cars, the efficiency of it, what it represents on a going forward basis, not only the reliability of it, but our being innovative. This is the first of its kind in the United States. It's all electric, it's driverless, et cetera. The security cameras that we have in place, the maintenance of all of those operational things, I feel really good about. That's part of how you want to evaluate success and the ease of it. And as people get more familiar with it and we get even more effective, I think, even with our bus routes, because this was always designed to be a multimodal system. And people getting into the efficiency of that, of knowing that the trains will come every 10 minutes, they can set their clock on it and they'll get used to that, and being able to get off in certain locations and have buses waiting to take them where they want. All of that is how I want to look at it. It's not just right now as myopic as to say, wow, you only got 2,000 people now that you're charging. It's much broader than that. And so this is for future generations. And right now, this is a disruptive thing, if you will, on how people use transportation. It's new, and we'll grow with it. I feel really good about it, because at the core, what's there is something that's really substantive. It has really been constructed well, and it's very efficient.
The next segment, opening up to Middle Street, will definitely bring on more riders. The hope is 2025. How confident are you that they'll meet that benchmark and get?
I'm very confident. I'm very confident in that, and I have every reason to be, based on what I've just experienced over the last 2.5 years. And I don't try to look back, and I don't want to belabor it, and I've already alluded to it. We stepped into a very challenging situation at the time, and we made the most of it against macro conditions that were not ideal. It's not anything was conducive here. Remember, we stepped in during the middle of a pandemic when times were very difficult. So that said, and knowing where we are, we actually have the guideway pretty much built to Middle Street. We're starting to, head down the Dillingham corridor, and there are other things we have to get. But I'm very confident that, look, in this business, constructing something like this, I was really, struck by some of the comments that were made. There are unpredictable things, and I want to be really careful about that. But if you ask me about my confidence, I'm very confident, and I believe we can. Well, I have to be careful. I'm not going to say we're going to beat that timeline. I'm just going to leave it at that right now. But all indications are we'll be there.
You mentioned and you thanked Lori Kahikina in your opening statement when we're talking about this topic of rail. But she recently got a C- by the Hart Board in just a performance evaluation. Do you agree with that assessment? And how would you grade the job that Lori Kahikina has done?
Okay, well, first of all, that was Lori's interpretation of her grade. She said C-, okay? And I mean, that came from her. And I normally wouldn't talk about personnel matter, except that Lori went public with it to the paper, and it's become public commentary. So I just want to say the following. First of all, I've been very acknowledging and supportive of Lori in her role. If you two know me from my past background, and I would tell you, although I had nothing to do with the appointment of Lori, that was not my decision at the time. That was done by, I believe, Mayor Caldwell, but Lori and I met just as we were coming into office. So that said, I was certainly aware of her reputation at EMV, but I would tell you, and her accomplishments, I always say, what versus who, when you start talking about critical hiring needs, what are the skill sets you're looking for? And right from the get-go, and where the project was at, we needed to have somebody who really understood engineering and was a good engineer who understood budgets and really, quite honestly, could look at their organizational structure and be able to determine the personnel she needed to get the job done. And Lori did all of that exceptionally well. If you look at her performance appraisal, which I've had the privilege to look at, this led to her C+ assessment, if you will. The top part of it, as it relates to her engineering and what's been done, was glowing. It exceeded expectations. What they did was they incorporated more of an aspiration on the bottom part of it from the standpoint of what they would like to see in a CEO, as far as somebody with, these external visionary things, money raiser, all of that kind of stuff. And in there, they put it in more of an aspirational and challenging role. So when they averaged it all in, it was pretty much about a 3.5 out of a 2 to 5 scale. And Lori took that, she made that assessment and went public with it. I understand the board was not even going to go public. They hadn't even voted on that yet. But I would tell you that it's a real mischaracterization from the standpoint of the job that she's done and the confidence I have in her. I just got done telling you I'm very confident about where we're going to be in 2 years, and that really sets and rests with her, the team that she's put around her, and their knowledge of what they're doing. So, I give her a much higher grade on the spirit of what we needed. And I think what we need on a going forward basis for some time yet, the engineering part of this, especially coming down the Dillingham corridor, where we're going to be building a guideway and utility relocation underneath the 2 parallel tracks, which are not incidental at all, which are really significant. I think her skill sets and her knowledge and the fact that she's got the team around her that she has are very at the top. Really good.
I want to switch gears now and talk about another priority that you've laid out as mayor, something we've talked about, I think, every time you've been on, and that is recruitment and retention of employees citywide. But let's start with the police department. I know that,
Sure.
you know, in our conversations with Chief Logan, he said that one of the big challenges that a lot of officers have been retiring. And so as fast as they can get those recruiting classes through, and they are working very hard to recruit more folks to join the ranks, it's just not meeting the needs. And so they're basically, you know, sort of where he was when he started in terms of needing over 300 police officers. At the same time, we have significant safety challenges in our community. And I know that in your budget, you allocated quite a bit of money to go to HPD. What do you think will make the difference when it comes to getting more officers on the job?
Well, leadership means a lot, and I give Joe high marks, and I've told him this all along. So, you know, let me give you a perspective. Between 2019 and 21, we had 257 officers retire. Our average is about 86 retirees a year. In 22, we had 68 retire. So it's come down a little bit. But so far in June of 23, because Joe's been on the job, I believe, less than a year, or maybe he's coming up on a year. But halfway through 23, we've only had 17 retire. Now, I recognize that a lot of retirements sometimes happen at year end, but it's something we specifically have talked about from the standpoint of retention of our senior officers, because they are so invaluable based on knowledge. We're still dealing with somewhere between 360 to 390 openings. And we're doing everything we possibly can. You know, you mentioned $43 million that we put into the budget. You know, a lot of that goes to cover the collective bargaining. We were pretty aggressive in the raises we gave to the police department. You know, it was 5% raises, which compounds out at some 21 point something percent. You know, and a starting salary is $67,000 a year. And if after completion of the academy, after a first year, that bumps up to 77. That's good pay. And for somebody who would be young, within a few years after that, and working a relatively modest amount of overtime, that could become a six-figure job. So money is not going to be the issue going forward, because what is of paramount importance in our community is public safety. And so part of that is tied to our police department, the people who are sworn to protect and serve. And I don't have to tell you, because, you know, crime may be down, but gun violence is up here. We're very aware of it. And you can't have a police officer at every place when something like that is going to break out. But I think the public psyche on the threat, if you will, is real. And so we want to try to offer that assurance. And I believe that we are doing everything we can, try to recruit. We're trying to be flexible with our department. We're paying them well. We've agreed to flexible work hours now. We have 3 12-hour shifts going on, which seems to be effective on the scheduling for creating better coverage. It's a good morale thing as well. I want to build a police department. Look, if over the next, I want to sound presumptuous here, 5.5 years here, if I'm afforded a second term, if we could cut that number realistically in half and get it down to under 200, from everything I've been able to learn, and that would be really good. You're not going to get it down to 0. I've looked at the history of where it's been with openings, but if we could cut the number that we currently have open in half, that'll be a real accomplishment. And that's our goal. And I think, again, it starts with leadership. Starts if we can start to curb the retiring, but we've got to recruit. You know, being a police officer is a very challenging job. It's a very demanding job. It's not an easy job. And I've been the first one to say, I have my complete respect. You know, none of us put a gun on our hip and walk out the door each and every morning, you know, and not knowing, given the world that we live in, whether you're going to come home that night. Just that alone has my respect.
Talking about another significant milestone was the budget bill that the city council initially, it took some time to get there with a lot of discussion going on in the city council, but eventually you were able to sign that bill for the overall budget. Was there anything in the budget, of course, that you initially proposed at the beginning that you wish had maybe materialized at the end through those negotiations in the city council?
No, actually, you know, I'm sorry, Ryan. Actually, we did very well in the budget. You know, there was a lot of back and forth, but in the end, that's why I signed the budget this year. No, I signed it. It's the first time I think in 12 or 13 years the mayor's actually signed it, and I didn't sign it a year ago, probably out of my own, you know, lack of understanding on a couple of issues that I was advised. Look, this is the history. Mayors don't sign it, but I had so much confidence on this one that, irrespective of where the conflict was, which really had to do with the governance of city council over heart, that we're looking past that. I've got a lot of confidence in how we're working with Hart right now and where those responsibilities lie. So I wanted to sign it as a statement. Look, one of the things that I'm really proud of, and I don't know the past, I just know that now for 3 successive years, starting the first year, which was very difficult because we had 60 days to balance a budget that had a significant deficit to it coming into office, that was modeled after the previous year's budget, which had been slashed because of COVID, and we were still in COVID. Having that budget approved unanimously, having the last year's budget approved unanimously, which was really the one that had started to reflect our priorities, and this year, which we had all of our priorities in there, for 3 straight years to have the city council approve our budget unanimously, I felt really good about. So and I signed it too, Brian. So look, budgets are always tools, if you will. They're a guideline, but the good news is that we've got the resources we believe we need in the right places to continue to make a difference as a team.
You know, you talked about on this program and in your previous addresses to the city about these wicked problems that are plaguing our community. Now that you have that budget and signed in hand, what specifically in there do you think will help to address those really core problems of our community?
Sure. Well, let's keep rail in that mix. Rail is going to continue to be a challenge, right? We've got a lot of construction in there, and that was a wicked problem, but I think we've come a long way, and that's good. But clearly, you know, and this is not necessarily in any rank order, because they're so closely linked in priorities in my mind. But anything and everything we can do to create housing, and what we're going to do both from a city standpoint on things that haven't been done before, what we can do in collaboration with the state is right up there, especially on affordable housing. And, you know, there's a lot of talk in the air, there's a lot of possibility, and we need to execute on that. And clearly, closely tied to that is fixing DPP. And we're making a lot of strides on that. You know, that was broken, been broken for decades. It's multifaceted. We could spend 2 hours today just talking about it, but I have a lot of confidence, again, in the leadership in Dawn Takeuchi Apuna, her deputy, Jiro Sumata, but even the department itself is coming around, and some of the things that we're incorporating, you know, in not the least of which is technology, our investment in people, we're trying to hire people, really understanding the problems we're facing, our work with outside groups in the solar industry and permitting and planning industry, and even people with code, being able to read codes, some of the legislation that we're trying to pass, et cetera, which relates to self-certification, easing some of the tensions. Just a lot of things we're doing on DPP that is absolutely essential. And then, of course, our homeless challenge, which is not getting any easier. I have a lot of confidence in that strategy. There are some things that we're going on right now that I think we're going to, in working with the state, represent some really unprecedented possibilities with respect to the wraparound services. Because remember, the city doesn't have a Department of Health, and the state does, and that affords them monies and resources or whatever, although they would have to hire for it. But if we can come up with a combination of city facilities matched with state's wraparound services and begin to do this almost in vertical kahales, as opposed to, let's say, what you might think, which is out at Hawaii, or for that matter, the 12 or 13 residences that the governor set up across from Queens as a respite. If you start to think in those terms, if we can put people places where we can provide treatment for them, I'm really encouraged on what we can actually get. And I think that we could get a good grant. We're going to build up our core team. Right now we have about 28. I think we can get it to 60 people. We've got the vehicles now. We've got that capability of performing street medicine, as well as gaining trust and building and placing people. So I look at those things, and they're all so linked to quality of life here. Well, if you want to talk about creation of affordable housing that we do, conjunction with the state, fixing DPP, what it means for our economic recovery and homelessness, and knowing full well that even though it represents less than 1% of our population, it's a top of mind everywhere I go. And it was that way even before I ever got into office. So those are it. Then you talk about the staffing at the city on a broader context, or for that matter, building the police department and looking at some of the really systemic dysfunction we had. We did all the diagnostics. You know, it was appalled to find out it took 180 days to hire somebody at the city, and the bureaucracy that people had to go through. Those kinds of things If we can do that, and then the last thing I'll say is modernizing the city. Clearly we're in the fourth year of the third decade of the 21st century. City is there in a couple of things, but not on a lot. It's not just technology. It's a whole lot of other things we're doing. It's those things that we're focused on. Then the day-to-day operations, by the way. Then the day-to-day operations. Opening up swimming pools and okay. So if you want to know what it's like, it's all that stuff in your head. But I've been blessed to have a really good team around me. But it just keeps coming at you. It's every day, and you have wins. They don't necessarily get celebrated, and then you get challenges or setbacks, and you're trying to overcome that. But it is about the joy of the struggle. If you can imagine, and I'm going to get philosophical here, Albert Camus and Sisyphus are pushing the rock up the hill. If you can envision that, okay, and there's a lot of us pushing a very big rock up the hill if we look at it in the aggregate, it's understanding that no matter how much we struggle each and every day, it's coming back to work the next day and recognizing the rock is back down at the bottom of the hill, and you've got to be able to pick it up and find joy in that effort. And that's what I find so gratifying about this job, because the potential of the good that we can do is significant, really significant to the quality of living here and our lives together. So that's what this is about.
Well, there's the coach in you, that motivator talk that comes out there that we always enjoy hearing in these interviews. I want to talk about, because you mentioned the governor and just how things have been with the dynamics with the Green administration. In the history and past, at times Honolulu Hale and the state capitol have at times felt like a wall separated Punchbowl Street between these two areas with the dynamics that we've seen in the past between mayors and governors. How has your dynamic been with the Green administration, specifically with the governor? And how often do you talk about some of these issues? And if you guys are able to find commonality on some of these big issues?
Well, I'm really glad you asked me that question, because I take a lot of pride in that relationship. Let me just start off, though, and acknowledge Governor Ige, because, coming into office, it was the last 2 years of his term, and where we were together in the middle of the pandemic, getting sworn in January when there was not even any talk of vaccines being readily available, and everything seemingly was COVID. We had 3 Zoom calls a week. There was a lot of interaction, a lot of discussion. And through it all, I felt that in the first couple of years, and as he left office, our relationship was really good. But I think what we showed in that whole process of navigating through COVID was a very good working relationship with the state. Things were changing as he was leaving office. The night that Governor Green got elected, I went over to the convention center to pay my respects, and they called me up on stage, and I took the liberty of saying on stage, that the people of our state, and especially talking to Oahu, which is staying in my own lane, but they could expect unprecedented collaboration between the two of us. He and I had a relationship going back years ago, working on homelessness before, when he was still a state senator and before he ever became LG. And throughout all the years, he and I had talked about our homeless situation. So that was sort of a bonding factor. And that's why I've got a lot of confidence on some of the things. But look, he and I are on regular text messages daily, sometimes multiple. We just had dinner the other night. We've had a couple of meetings like that. Our teams are aligned. We've promised that because I think we see the potential in having it be just the opposite, Ryan, of what you described, of not having that polarity between the state and the city. Look, I've got no ego in this job, and as best I can tell, Governor Green has been no ego too, even though we're very different people. We understand the moment in time that we're in. We understand that leadership is situational and the possibilities before us, but more importantly, the mandate that we actually deliver on what's needed for our city and our state. And so I think in that regard, we have a high degree of compatibility about being willing to take on the challenges of the moment, be innovative, push for some new ideas, do away with some of the things that were outmoded, that were just getting in the way. And the very last thing we're going to do is turn it into some kind of political forum. I do not covet his job. I've given him peace of mind about that. I want to stay in my lane as mayor. He's governor, and we do our jobs respectively, and we'll collaborate together. That's where it's at.
I would like to get your take on another leader in our community, and that is the new UH Athletics Director, Craig Angeles. We had the privilege of speaking with him at length on Friday. He said that he's been doing breakfast, lunch, dinner, and receptions, just meeting as many folks as possible. Wondered if you'd had a chance to to meet at this point, and what your impressions are of him far. We know that you're a close watcher of the program there.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we did. I actually waited about a month, although it was recommended to Craig that he text me early on. So we had sort of a text relationship going, not that many texts, probably 5 or 6 or whatever, on a couple of things early on in his first week or two. So we had dinner together, and it was a very good meeting. It was my only time I've met him, and I've not talked to him since. But I told him, and I'll say it publicly, and in the spirit of everything I just said about Governor Green and myself, I told him, I said, look, we do not need a failure, a high-profile failure. Okay, we need you to be successful, and it's incumbent upon us to help you be successful. But you have to look at this. And I heard all the noise that was surrounding your appointment. Okay, I'm not going to judge you by that. I'm just going to challenge you, make you help you realize that this has to be the best work of your career. Okay, so let all of that other stuff go. Whatever's happened, that doesn't count. This is an important time right now. I can't think of one. I've been involved with the University of Hawaii Athletic Program since 1965, and especially as it relates to football. I don't think we've ever been at a more critical moment in time on the future of things and what we need from the athletics director. So I laid it out like that. It's you just grab the big gold ring. It's a huge challenge. We need you to succeed. Think about succeeding. That's sort of where it was.
We're almost out of time here, but I want to circle back on.
Come on, we can't be out of time.
I know it goes so quickly, but I want to just get another question in about the finance of the city, if we can, because yes, you signed this current, the budget into law, but now you guys are already crafting. Director Kawano mentioned just how quickly after this bill gets approved, he's already working on the next fiscal year, and you're already looking ahead. He mentioned some of the collective bargaining, some of those raises that need to be also included into just this next budget and allocated for. As you prepare for this next budget and see some of the things that you have to consider, also looking at some of the economic forecasting of what we're potentially could be seeing. What are your thoughts about some of your priorities for the next budget and what you want to really establish early on as you begin those conversations?
Look, we're going to have to, none of these problems we just described earlier are going to get solved in the next coming year, irrespective of what we have in a budget. I mean, just the degree of difficulty, right? So all of that remains intact. It's going to be really on what we can make sure that we can pay all the bills, so we can balance the budget. That's the trick of this. I think one of the additional things that we're going to probably be looking at is to see, because it was a promise made on where we are on any kind of tax reform, however that manifests itself. And I know that there's some things being proposed by the council, but we've got to look at that. We've got to look at that in earnest, because look, I don't have to tell you, everybody is concerned about the cost of living and the high cost of living here. And then those variable kinds of expenses, whether they're in food, whether they're in energy, whether they're in tax assessments, all of those things don't make life any easier. And especially in an inflationary cycle that while it's seemingly coming down here in Hawaii, we feel and experience. So look, I think the priority is always going to be to make sure we've got the resources that we have, that we can deliver on the core city services, and especially the resources needed as a priority, because where you write your checks, what you spend your money on is an indication of what you hold to be most important. And we've got these big problems that we're determined to address. And so that's how I'm looking at it, Ryan, is that this is not a one-year fix. I'm really gratified by the fact we've got the resources needed. We certainly got the money put aside to hire people. We're in a recruiting mode across the board, not just with HPD. We need to do that. I'm 40% short, 376 openings in facilities and maintenance. I just said earlier that the police department has 360 to 390, and it fluctuates. We got 40% of our workforce. We just named a new director to step in there, Gene Albano. Just Friday, we just swore him in to take over, and that's a big department. When it's at full strength, it's over 900 people. To provide core city services, and the kinds of things that matter to people, especially when it comes to road repair and some of the other things that they do. So it's those things. It's all of that. It's getting the city to operate is a highly functioning unit that doesn't disappoint. And that's across the board. It's our parks. One of the things we learned in the town halls, if there was a common denominator in the 11 town halls that we did over 10 weeks, it was how valuable our parks and recreational opportunities are for the people who live here, the people who came to those meetings, and how much they talked about it, whether that was true of trying to build a swimming pool in Kahuku, of which we've had now multiple meetings on, and I think we're going to move forward on that. We're certainly have a good plan, but all the way across the board on how people enjoy themselves here. So it's all of that. It's paying attention to the quality of life issues. I think that's what this job is about. We talk oftentimes about we're here to serve the public. That's the expectation. We're trying to fulfill that expectation. So it looks like people in this office, me, my team, and everybody else is aware and is caring and is doing something about it. I don't know how else to say it. It's like that.
It's funny because you just signed a budget, and then Ryan's question just about the next one, it just goes back to that Sisyphus analogy and pushing the rock up the hill. My goodness, endless rocks, I think, that you face, Mr. Mayor. We are out of time, but I want to give you an opportunity just to address the folks tuning in today about your final thoughts this morning to them.
Well, my final thoughts are in recounting, if you will, the challenges. This job is the privilege of a lifetime for me. And it's also the challenge of a lifetime. And so I'm fortunate now to be surrounded by an incredible group of men and women who embrace that challenge as well. And we're all here in a place that we live, in a place that we love, trying to make a difference.
All right, Honolulu Mayor Rick Blangiardi, thanks so much for joining us this morning and updating us on all that's happening at the Hale over there. And just
how do I get more time on this show? It seems like I ask a couple of questions and you guys start signing off already. I don't understand it.
Graphics and time. We will work on those two requests.
All right, thank you. Thank you both for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Aloha.
Thank you. Always great to catch up with the mayor. We covered a lot of ground. And if you missed any of this, remember, you can always catch it later on Channel 50 or listen as a podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Interesting, Ryan, we started out talking about Skyline, and he has a lot of confidence in the system. It is early days, and he says you can't judge it just by what is happening in the moment, but really look at it as a transformational, impact on our community, something that will have long-lasting impacts for generations to come. Of course, he talked about Lori Kahikina and really expressing a lot of confidence in her, despite the rating that she gave herself, interpreting the board's rating of her getting a 3 out of 5. She interpreted that around a C. He's saying that he doesn't like to talk about personnel matters, but really he sees that as somewhat of a misinterpretation and that he has full confidence in her leadership.
Yeah, her leadership and the team and the Heart Board. He also mentioned Colleen Hanabusa, that saying that they have done a great job to get the Skyline to where it's at now. He also expressed confidence in this next phase going to Middle Street, saying that this is something that, of course, anything can happen, but he remains confident that that 2025 benchmark that they have set for the Skyline to continue to Middle Street will be operational by then. And then this, again, will include a large sector, an important part of this rail line, which would include the Honolulu Airport, which many people are expected to, which will help to increase ridership in that area because of the amount of people that would be making their way from the west side of the island to the airport. We also got to hear a little bit about just his thoughts on just the overall budget, saying that this is the first time that he's signed the budget. He was very happy with the way that things went on, the negotiations that happened, that went back and forth with the city council, and his thoughts as he continues to prepare for the next budget already and putting out some of those top priorities and agendas, looking for ways, of course, to address the cost of living overall, recognizing that that is something that will directly impact the residents of this county, the city and county, but also laying out sort of his agenda and some of the top priorities, which really haven't changed. He talked about homelessness, affordable housing, some of the same key issues and things that we've heard from this administration for the past few years.
Yeah, it's that quality of life issues that he was really addressing there. Also interesting to hear about his relationship with two of the top leaders in our state, the governor and the new UH athletics director, saying that he's on he has a texting relationship with both. The governor, he says they text potentially multiple multiple times a day. I want access to the phone there. I want to know. And then highlighting that dinner that he had with the new UH Athletics Director, Craig Angelis, who we want to mention was on our program on Friday. We had a really interesting interview with him, and just laying out the stakes for, the incoming athletics director, and saying that really in no time in the program's history, as far as the mayor sees it, has it been this critical to lift up the programs overall, but specifically when it comes to football.
Yeah, and as someone who has strong ties to University of Hawaii, we know the mayor is very passionate about the athletic program. They're saying that this has to be the best work that you've done in his conversation, again, with the athletic director, that this has to be the best work that he has ever done. But, also the mayor addressing some of these other concerns that, of course, are happening in the community. He talked about DPP and the work that continues to go on there, saying they have to do better, that they are really trying to change some fundamental and some foundational things that were wrong with the department, that this is something that is taking some time, but he's very confident in the progress that they continue to make in that backlog. Again, this is a department that has caused so much frustration among those who are waiting for those permits. The mayor fully aware of those concerns and saying that it continues to be something that his administration will work on. So again, a lot to talk about in short amount of time. We always try to get as much conversation, as much topics in with the mayor, but we seemingly always run out of time and can't always ask all the questions that we have planned. On Wednesday, we're going to be joined by someone else who actually also occupied that office of Honolulu Hale.
That's right. Former Honolulu Mayor Kirk Caldwell is coming on. He has written a book. Our beaches were empty, but our hospitals were full. It is his reflection on what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Those first early days, he interviewed leaders throughout our community and put together this collection of interviews, which really reads like a conversation. It's a very interesting book, and we're looking forward to catching up with former Mayor Kirk Caldwell on our program. We hope we see you here on Wednesday at 10:30.
Take care and aloha.